channel. As you can see, I kind of think I'm getting things figured out. Kind of, sort of, maybe. It's a journey, and you're on it with me. As promised, we're going to be discussing resin. And I don't know how many that may click on this video. Um, I'm kind of targeting the art community, I guess. Um, Art commentary. I don't know. Do I really want to be an art commentary channel? I don't even know what I want to be at this moment. I'm still trying to find a niche, but I know I like talking about things. And one of the things I want to talk about is a thing that everybody hates. Even I myself am a little on it. I can't fully decide how I feel about resin because I do feel that there are amazing crafts that come out of resin work, but there's also an excessive amount of people that do not use resin properly. And I'm not even saying as far as like what they create might be wonderful, but it's the actual process that they are not being safe. And I feel like a lot of the anti-resin people kind of pick one thing to harp on, and so resin crafters start to ignore them. And the problem is that there are some very real negative effects that resin can have. And if you aren't using resin in a ethical and safe manner, then it is a liability, and you're not being only a liability to the earth and the environment, but a liability to yourself. And I say this as a person who was doing resin crafts right before the boom, right at the beginning of the boom. I kind of fell off of resin when it became too popular. My partner calls me a contrarian very lovingly, and unfortunately, he's not entirely incorrect. I have a tendency to fall off of things if they get too popular because I like being a special little snowflake, and here I am creating essentially an art commentary channel of which there are millions, which is probably why I hesitate to say that. But enough about me, onto the actual resin talk, which is still slightly about me, so I apologize. That was a lie. I am a liar. But what I want to say and what I want to stress is that I have been the person who has used resin incorrectly, and I have suffered some of the negative effects. There is actually a 2% chance of users that are not correctly wearing the proper PPE to get something called allergic dermatitis. And essentially, that just means you become allergic to resin and other epoxies. And so, when my hands come into contact with uncured resin or epoxies, and I still use plumber's epoxy occasionally, um, my hands get super itchy and they get like red splotches. And basically, like I said, I'm allergic. And it doesn't happen to everyone. According to my research, about 2% of people actually end up walking away with an allergy to epoxy, and I'm one of those 2%. And so I feel like I am a decent party to discuss the fact that resin needs to be used very carefully. I'm not fully anti-resin. I don't think that nobody should be using resin, but I think that as accessible as resin has become, we need to be educated. And I don't know now so much so about the products that are purchased, but when I was doing resin, all of the resin that I had to purchase was in Korean, and I can't read Korean. And there really wasn't much text on the bottles to begin with, and I don't believe that there was enough on there to give full safety instructions. And I don't think even I actually got the idea from one of those like 5 minute craft channels. It wasn't 5 minute crafts specifically, it was a different one, but like they weren't wearing proper PPE. I basically learned how to use resin watching those channels. And so I didn't they don't cover how to properly use resin or how to safely use resin. And I think that's something that needs to be discussed more often, even with the TikTokers that do resin. I think that it might be beneficial that they discuss the safety aspects of it. Now, there's a lot of anti resin people that are, hooked on the environment and will not get off of that soapbox, which is totally fair. It is actually horrible for the environment. But I think that if you're making things that people aren't planning on just tossing or getting rid of, then it's a little, it's thorny. It's another, it's not quite as ethically thorny as true crime is, but it is very a thorny situation because it's not all bad, but it's not all good either. So since I'm talking about it, what are some of the personal negative effects that you can walk away with if you are using resin incorrectly? And I want to really stress that that's incorrectly because you can use resin in a correct manner that you wouldn't walk away with these potential negative side effects. So skin irritation is one I've talked about. 10% of people have contact dermatitis, which just means like prolonged exposure in that setting, they'll start to get really itchy. And then 2% of people walk away with allergic dermatitis, meaning that the minute that uncured resin touches your hands, you start getting really itchy and start having side effects. You can also develop asthma or exacerbate existing asthma and other kind of lung issues. So any kind of like breathing problems, might develop a cough. It can actually cause reproductive issues. Um, and then nervous system problems such as nausea, confusion, headache, loss of consciousness, eye, nose, and throat irritation. And amongst people who have had prolonged incorrect use of resin, cancer. And so it is a carcinogen. It is something that is not to be trifled with. I think a lot of people don't particularly understand you are working with a highly toxic chemical, even after it's cured. So, what you should be doing is, depending upon the level of um, resin work that you're doing, you should be wearing at the very least eye protection, a respirator, so that's like an N95, not, one of those homemade cloth masks or the ones that, we used to be able to wear in stores. You want a full-blown respirator. You want gloves until it's fully cured. That includes the demolding process and giving it a little bit of time after that before it's considered fully cured. Generally, from my understanding, it's about 24 hours after you demold the product, then it's fully cured. But if it's still in that mold, you should be wearing gloves even during that demolding process. Uh, if you want to have sleeves of some kind, so if the resin splashes, it doesn't get on your bare skin. Uh, and then if you're doing larger projects, like the people who put the epoxy on the floors, you want to have an apron and boots on. Basically, you do not want that resin getting anywhere in touch with your skin whatsoever in any way, shape, or form. So again, like to just to harp on it, you want at least an eye protection, respirator, gloves, and sleeves, even if you're just doing resin dice or resin pendants or the small crafts that you can do at home. You also want a fully ventilated space. If you're doing this in your house, for the love of God, please stop. Please stop. Because if it's in the air. Unless you have it right next to like two open windows or something where those fumes can go out, if they're getting into your house, they're not just hurting you, they're hurting everyone in your house and they're hurting your pets. And I hate to be that guy, but resin is a highly toxic chemical, especially when curing. Those fumes that come off of it, and I don't know if you're dumb like me and have watched the fumes coming off of it, it's incredibly, incredibly toxic. And then not just being toxic to yourself, it's also toxic for the environment, which is the reason a lot of people get a lot of hate. Now, to be fair, it is not particularly clear what kind of resin is the worst for the environment or if there's one that is better than the others. Unfortunately, resin really just hasn't been around. Those studies haven't really occurred, so we haven't been able to pinpoint which resin is good, which resin is bad, are they all bad, are they all good? So a lot of these are blanket statements on just effects from any kind of resin. Um, Now, the personal effects, those are clear and easy to tell, especially when people haven't been using the proper safety equipment. The environmental effects that I'm about to get into, these are the ones where it's not clear. Is it UV resin or is it the kind of resin that's put on floors, or is it the resin that's used in electronic pieces? Um, there is one thing that is for sure, and that is an effect from the craft resin, the UV resin that a lot of us use. Um, the chemicals that are in it, if it's thrown in a landfill, they can and will leach into the environment, especially if they come into contact with water. It's not exactly water soluble, but it kind of is because it allows the chemicals to leach faster and break down faster. And a lot of these chemicals that have leached into the environment from landfills are actually having notable side effects on the animal populations and actually showing genetic mutations inside of these animals because of the leaching chemicals. Um, as well as it does take fossil fuels to make resin, so that's just something to keep in mind. Um, and that no matter what, there's really no proper way to dispose of resin. It's always going to affect the environment. So it's kind of it, all the people making 1,001 different domino sets that people don't particularly buy. If you're throwing that out, you've kind of just wistfully added to it. So just be careful the kind of projects you want to make. If you think something is going to sell, then cool, give it a shot. You can't be faulted for something just not selling. But if you're over making something that's kind of a gimmick and everybody and their mother is making domino sets, then maybe don't. Maybe find something else. Honestly, resin dice seem to be really popular, and I know that I have had multiple dice sets for years and I refuse to get rid of them. And I've actually considered buying resin dice sets just because of the fact that I know that those will stick with me potentially for a lifetime because resin does have a very long shelf life, for lack of a better term. Um, and so it's pretty clear that in the long run, there's a lot more personal negative side effects that we know of right now. So in the future, this may change. There may need to be an update as far as the environmental effects, but it cannot be ignored that there are very clear negative environmental effects that happen with resin. Also, the fact that it's not biodegradable. So it's essentially going to be constantly leaching the bad chemicals into the environment, into the dirt, into everything for years and years and years and years beyond our time. Which, in a sense, kind of leads to the sort of benefits of resin because it is a highly high resistant. Or, that's not the word. It's like a high fidelity. It can handle a lot. It can take a lot of abuse before breaking. It actually has a very high range of application as far as you can use epoxy resin in just about everything. And it's actually super useful in electrical pieces, such as like even pieces in your car, being used in small parts like that. And also the fact that it doesn't shrink that much during the curing process. So what you pretty much make while it's uncured is about what you're going to get. It doesn't break down very easily. I think I already mentioned that. And then it can actually be used really well as a high performance adhesive because it doesn't break down super easily and it's chemically resistant. So high um, your high powered cleaners, especially if you put it on a floor, if you put bleach on the floor, it's not going to break down the resin that is on the floor. Um, and so there's some positives there as far as it's very long lasting, but the fact that it's long lasting is a double-edged sword because it'll last forever, but it will also then potentially cause long lasting damage to the earth forever. Um, And forever is not, I say that in quotes. It won't last forever, but it will last a very long time. And so, again, I don't want to hate on people who who do resin crafts. I don't feel that they deserve all the hate that they get, but I feel that there's a lot of people who do resin crafts that need more education before they go into it, and I don't believe that that education is widely available yet. Now, if any of you watching this know of a resin artist that's very clear about the the safety precautions that need to be taken, please leave them in the comments down below. Please, let's let's find some good resources for everybody. That way, if more people want to keep doing resin, they can keep doing it in a safe environment that's not going to hurt them and cause long lasting damage to what little we have left of our planet. Because that's where my concern came from, is the fact that I developed allergic dermatitis, so it wasn't really fun to work with resin anymore when your hands are constantly itchy. But also, I just can no longer justify the negative effects that it had on the planet, especially because I wasn't really selling my stuff. If you are doing, a craft that people are buying up, and if you're, only using resin on a case by case basis, awesome, cool, keep at it. I'm not here to tell anyone to stop. I'm just here to try and make sure that the information that's not really being widely available is available somewhere else. So I just want to make sure that y'all are protected, that y'all are not hurting yourselves any more than you have to. Um, so go out there, make crafts, do amazing things, and like I said, I am not a person to talk. I still do polymer clay. Um, and that's not any really probably any better for the environment. And I'm going to be totally honest, plastic crafts are not great for the environment, but unfortunately, nor is like NFTs, which are apparently becoming more popular amongst artists, sort of quote unquote, because some actual artists are selling NFTs and then some are getting their art stolen. But that's a totally different story for a totally different day. I don't understand NFTs. I just know that cryptocurrency, specifically Bitcoin, is also really bad for the environment. If y'all enjoyed this waffle, if y'all found any of this information useful, go ahead and like. Hopefully, you've watched enough now to feel like subscribing. And I don't know what we're going to talk about next. If you have any ideas, go ahead and leave a comment if you're one of those people. And if not, that's totally fine. I hope you guys have a wonderful day, and I'll see you next time. Bye.